I've graduated in physics, and then I moved to neuroscience, and now I'm a professor of neuroscience at the Brain Institute. I was working with different stuff with stroke and with epilepsy, and in 2006, this Ph.D. student who was from a Santo Daime church, he invited me to one of the ceremonies, and as a scientist, that experience was very curious, to say the least. From then on, from 2006 until today, our group have been focused more and more on experiments with ayahuasca. So what I'm going to tell you about is what we have done so far on the 3 lines of research that we are interested in. The first line of research that we are conducting is to try to figure out some of the neural basis of the ayahuasca experience. So we are doing what I call a low-level kind of experiment in which we are just interested in some of the basic effects that ayahuasca have during the acute effects of ayahuasca. Later, we became more interested in how ayahuasca might change our brain in a longer time period. So after more sessions. And lately, for the last 3 years, we've been studying the antidepressive effects of ayahuasca. So these are the 3 main messages I'm hoping to bring you today. The first one is related to the neural basis of the ayahuasca experience. That acquisition started in 2006, is an experiment in which we had 10 experienced ayahuasca users from the Santo Daime Church, and they were recruited to participate in this study in which they would have 2 fMRI sessions, one before and the other one under the effect of ayahuasca. This study has a number of limitations. The first limitation is the number of subjects, the number of volunteers. We only have 10 volunteers. The second great limitation is the fact that we are only studying experienced individuals. So that restricts our results to this group of individuals. And the third is the fact that we don't know how time is influencing these results, and expectancy is also influencing these results in the sense that, they're all experienced, they know how to deal with the experience, and they know of the changes that we were looking at. So basically, we designed 3 experiments on a single session. So in a single fMRI session, they had 3 tasks. The first task is what we called a verbal fluency task, in which the individuals are asked to present a letter, and they'll just say words that begin with that letter. The reason why we decided to go with the task, although it seems a little bit strange, is to look for the default mode network. This is a good protocol to modulate the default mode network, so then we would look at the default mode network using this verbal fluency task. The second task they had to do was to do nothing. Just lay down in the scanner and have their eyes closed and let it go. The reason why we had this second protocol, the resting state protocol, is that we were interested also in understanding how different networks in our brain interact. And the third protocol that we used is a mental imagery task. So we were interested in how ayahuasca modulates our visual system and how that eventually relates to the visual experiences that psychedelics have. These are some of the results we have from this first experiment. This is a result from the mental imagery task. These areas that you're seeing here are areas of the brain that have been activated under the effect of ayahuasca when the individuals were trying to mentally generate a couple of images, but that were not influenced by ayahuasca when they were looking at the images. So these regions here depict brain areas that are modulated by ayahuasca when you have your eyes closed and when you're imagining something. The regions that we found this selective modulation done by ayahuasca in the mental imagery process engages visual areas, including the primary visual area, engages medial temporal areas that are related to memory, and engages Brodmann area 10, this frontal area here, that have been related to awareness. There's a paper published this year relating Brodmann area 10 with lucid dreaming. So what is lucid dreaming? Basically is being aware of your own dreams. And this area seemed to be an area engaged in lucid dreaming. So because of that, we decided to analyze another structure that is also related to awareness, that is the thalamus. And why is the thalamus related to awareness? If I ask you right now to pay attention to the contact that your clothes make with your arm, every one of you will feel it. And one of the brain structures that have been implicated in this attentional movement, in this awareness movement, is the thalamus. So that if I ask you, your thalamus kind of direct your attention or participate in the process of directing your attention to your arm. So what we were interested in is, does the thalamus get involved also when you have this type of experience, when you have an increased awareness of your visual inner world? And this is what we found. Indeed, different thalamic nuclei, they are involved. What we are showing here is how different thalamic nuclei are related to different cortical areas. These areas were modulated by ayahuasca, meaning that it seems as though that indeed the thalamus is a key structure on the increased awareness some people have under the influence of ayahuasca. The other thing we did was to look at the default mode network. What we found for the default mode network, a decrease in activity of the default mode network and changes in connectivity of the default mode network is also related to the experience of ayahuasca. What is interesting here is the fact that these changes are the same changes that have been found in meditation. So when you look at meditation during when the individuals are meditating, or when you compare experienced meditators to naives, you see changes that are similar to the ones that we are seeing. Basically, you have a decrease of activity in the default mode network, and you have an increase of activity in this other network that's called the salience network. One thing that we are doing right now is try to relate these two types of results, try to relate how these networks change under the effect of ayahuasca with eventual changes that we might find when individuals are practicing meditation. So we have one study going on that it's about trying to find if this relation exists. For the long-lasting effects of ayahuasca, we helped in a study that was coordinated by Jordi Riba in Spain. And basically what Jordi did was to collect data from 22 experienced ayahuasca users with a group of control subjects. And what we did was to look for differences in brain structure between these groups of individuals. And we found that, in fact, there are two structures, the posterior cingulate gyrus and the anterior cingulate gyrus, that are changed by the long-term use of ayahuasca. What is most interesting on this study, I find, is that this change in the posterior cingulate gyrus, this decreasing of the density of the posterior cingulate gyrus, correlates with traits of personality like transpersonal identification and self-transcendency, which have been related to openness. So this contributes to the findings that the Roland's group have shown. What we have contributed here is just showing that these changes on personality traits, on openness, for instance, correlates with changes in different brain structures. With this type of results, a lot of people have been trying to find a correlate on if you have an increase of this brain area means something. If you have a decrease in brain area, it means something else. An increase or a decrease on the size of a specific brain area mean nothing. There's no causality to it. It's not good or bad. It's just a change. So the third set of studies that we have been conducting is the study on ayahuasca with depression. We've done a first open label study that I'm presenting the results here. This open label study was conducted in 17 patients. What you see here in red and in blue are two different psychiatry scales. What you see here on the left is what's going on along the experimental session, so the baseline 10 minutes before they drink ayahuasca, and then 180 minutes. After 180 minutes, we already find a statistical difference between the baseline and the 180 minutes. But what's more interesting, you see that that change continues for 21 days. So after a single session of ayahuasca, what we found is that there is an antidepressant and a persistent antidepressant effect that lasts for 21 days. The other two scales, the CADSS scale, measures dissociative symptoms. There is a very strong dissociation that is already known along the ayahuasca experience. And this scale here measures mania kind of symptoms, showing that at least in this group of major depressive patients, we do not see an increase on mania symptoms. On these patients, we also conducted a SPECT study before and 8 hours after the experimental session. And interesting, we found that there is a change in activity of 3 nuclei. This is the nucleoaccumbens. The second row, you see the insula, and the third row, you see the subgenual cortex. Particularly, the subgenual cortex have been related to depression. That might be, an interesting marker of what we have been finding. What is the main issue with this study? What is the main limitation of this study? Is the fact that we are not using a placebo as a control. And why is that so important in depression? Because placebo effect can reach up to 50 to 55% effect on depression. So it means that about 50% of patients under the effect of placebo, they will improve also. So we didn't control for that. And that is the reason why we decided to go for the third experiment. It's supposed to be a double-blind experiment. And the reason why I'm saying it's supposed to be a double-blind because it's not really double. At least it's blind to the patient, that's for sure. But it's very difficult to conduct a double-blind experiment with psychedelics. As soon as you interview the subject, you know. So we had long conversations in our group on how to control for that. And the thing is that there are interesting aspects on that experience, particularly on the depressive patients. That is, the placebo effect is high, meaning that the psychiatrists who are doing the evaluations, they are not 100% sure that what those individuals have taken is placebo or ayahuasca. Second, our placebos seem to work as well as in a sense that one individual threw up with a placebo. All right. So our placebo is working. They are all naives. The control group and the patients, they have never have any experience with psychedelics. This is their first experience with psychedelics. And we are hoping to recruit 40 patients with major depression, 40 controls in which half will drink ayahuasca and half will drink a placebo. We've decided to acquire a whole bunch of different markers of depression along the experimental session. So along the 180 minutes that they are under the effect of placebo or ayahuasca, we are acquiring these 4 scales at different instants along the session. We are also acquiring continuous EEG data along the session. We are acquiring a couple of scales, a mystical experience, the hallucinogenic rating scale, and an Amsterdam resting state questionnaire. And we are also acquiring saliva cortisol. Whoever have ever participated in a double-blind experiment know how a pain in the neck it is. It's very time-consuming and very difficult, and to recruit the patients and, well, you know, the whole thing. So we decided, as we were going to go through this, so why don't we make our life a little bit more difficult? We decided to conduct a larger experiment that we are acquiring psychiatric scales, neuroimaging, fMRI, and anatomical MRI, neuropsychological evaluation, sleep EEG, and some biochemical markers that comes from the blood. We are acquiring all this data one day before and one day after the experimental session. Every subject that participates in our experiment stays in the hospital for 4 days. He arrives in the hospital on Tuesday. He do all these evaluations. And then, this is Tuesday, so it's a really tight schedule. On Tuesday, they arrive in the lab. On Wednesday, we have the experimental. On Tuesday, so they sleep in the lab. And while we conduct these sleep EEG studies, so they sleep in the lab from Tuesday to Thursday. They have an MRI scanner taking the neuropsychological evaluation. Everything is taken on Tuesday afternoon. They sleep in the lab from Tuesday to Wednesday. Wednesday, they go to the experimental session. So the experimental session lasts for the whole day. They have, we have instructions. So it lasts for the whole day from 7 a.m. to 4 p.m. in the afternoon. And then some of the patients, they stay in the hospital depending on their condition. Some of the patients are allowed to go back home. And the control subjects, the control volunteers, they go home. And then on Thursday, they come back to the hospital to do this whole battery of exams again. So what we are hoping to do with this experiment is basically to find out different biomarkers. All of these are different biomarkers for depression. So what we are hoping to look for, to research, is how do ayahuasca selectively changes these biomarkers. IL-4, IL-6, and IL-10, they are markers of our immune system. BDNF, BDNF is a marker of is a neurotrophic factor, so it's a marker of synaptic plasticity, so to say. And cortisol is a marker of stress. So we are trying to understand that as in a broader perspective. Patients, they are being followed now for 6 months. So after the experimental session, we follow the patients for 6 months. We don't do the whole battery of exams again. We just follow them through psychiatric scales, the Hamilton and the Madras scale. We follow them on day 7, day 14, 1 month after, and then from them to 6 months every month. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 months after. We don't have the results yet, but I thought I could share some of our impressions on this experiment. The first thing is that we have managed already to conduct the experiment in 68 individuals. Out of these 68 individuals, 39 are in the control volunteers, and 29 are patients. We are probably going to have to go another year. It's a 1 subject a week. So we're talking about 80 weeks. We started that in January 2014. That's when we started data acquisition, when you have everything approved. So it started in January 2014, and this week we had the 68th subject. The first impression we have is that the patients, they seem to suffer much more than the control volunteers. So there's a lot of suffering in the experimental session. It's not an easy session. It's not an easy session to whoever is conducting the session. It's not an easy session for the patients particularly. 30% of the patients vomited, and this is important if you want to try that as a clinical tool. So 30% of the patients vomited, and 20% of our control group have vomited, and one with a placebo, like I said. 3 patients, they have already asked to take ayahuasca again. We don't offer, again, our deal with the patients is that we are going to follow them for 6 months. During this period of 6 months, we are going to put back their regular medication. And then after 6 months, if they want to repeat the session, they can. We did not have a problem on, this is something that I believe we'll have in the future, someone in the placebo group who wants to repeat the experience. I'm serious. I'm not, it's serious. And we don't know what to do. But anyways, that haven't happened yet. The placebo effect is high, really, really high. To a point that, and the group of patients that we have, they're really severely impaired. There was just one case of one patient that had a placebo, and he left, he was a fisherman. He was so well after the placebo session that after 15 years without going to the sea, he decided to take a walk on the beach. 15 years. What are the perspectives from the patients? This is some of the reports, and what I have here on the left is a drawing from one of our patients. A drawing from a psychedelic experience. No colors. And this patient is the one who said that. I was in contact with the essence of pain. Everything was pain. My message here is that it is difficult. Out of the 29 patients, only one had what I can say had a full pleasant experience throughout the experimental session. The other patients, they did not. So with that, this was taken last week, so we did not have time to have all the group here. But this is the group that I have to thank. We are giving psychedelic to individuals in a hospital setting. But all of our individuals, they appreciate it, although they went through a difficult time. A lot of our individuals, they refer to our lab as a 5-star hotel. It's so, you know, we expect to have even a more significant placebo effect because it's not really a placebo. These patients, they stay in the hospital for 4 days. And they come, most of them, they come from a very difficult reality. When they come to the hospital, it is indeed a 5-star hotel. I believe that we are not calling it a placebo effect. We are calling it a care effect. So it's not a placebo. We are really taking care of these people, giving attention, offering comfort, offering whatever. Our main difficulty will be to control for this care effect. I'm really happy to be here with you. Thank you. When two things are correlated, that doesn't mean causality. When we see correlation, we always tend to find a causality to that correlation. It is a possibility. Causality is a possibility. But with this type of analysis, we cannot say that they are actually causally related. Our subjects are in a hospital in the morning of the session. Around 7 o'clock, they have a light breakfast. Then we go through all the instructions, and the instructions, since they are naive to the psychedelic experience, what we try basically to convince them is that if the more they let it go, the easiest would be the experience. So this takes about an hour or so to talk about all the effects that they might face, that is secure and all that. So around 10, that's when the experimental session begins. And during the experimental session, we have a protocol in which we selected some musics from the UDV. So we thought that by bringing music from some tradition would help the experience. So what we have none of our psychiatrists have an experience with ayahuasca. That was not on purpose, but right now it's good that they don't have an experience, because they don't go through, they don't contaminate the blindness of the study. But on the other hand, you need someone to assist them. So we have 2 people assisting. It's not none of them are psychotherapists. One of them is me, a physicist. This was also a big discussion in our group, if we were going to have that together with a psychotherapist like most of the groups do, or if we could just have ayahuasca do its job. And this is what we are doing. So what we are doing is we're just trying to assist whenever they feel they need assistance. So we are there all the time. We have 2 to 3 people there close to where they are. And at 40 minutes, 1 hour and 40 minutes, 2 hours and 40 minutes, and 4 hours, we have a structured interview with the psychiatry. So the psychiatry gets in. The psychiatry doesn't follow the experimental session. They're in the next room. We are in the experimental session. So they have periods where they listen to music, periods where we ask them to stay in silence, periods where we have them sit up, at least in the first 45 minutes, to try to control a little bit for the vomiting, for the nausea. And then, so basically that's it. So we are there. There's, trying to bring as much comfort as we can. But we don't have a therapy together with it. The reason why everyone is concerned with blind in this type of experiment is that this is the language that science is using. On the other end, I believe, as I was talking to someone earlier, I believe that psychedelics have it opens the possibility of changing many of things that have been established in science. Just to give you an example, if you look at most of the cognitive science field, what we have done was to move out of the way the problem of consciousness and conduct and be happy conducting third-person experiments, because we don't know how to do other way. So what we did was, if we want to do first-person experiment, first we need to understand what consciousness is. Since we do not understand what psychology did or cognitive sciences did, was to move that out of the way. That is a problem. We will look at that problem afterwards. And then we can move on and do the third-person experiments and define variables that you want to study. But I believe that psychedelics may play a very significant role to bring back this first problem, that is what consciousness is. So then I believe we could have a breakthrough on what cognitive sciences mean. But right now, we have to be restricted to what at least to conduct these experiments, what we are doing is being restricted to what the language is right now to present results in a way that the science community can understand. And by doing, and not proposing something different, then we would have, we might have an interesting result, but you still have to convince on your method. So what we're doing is to use standard methods. We have to do it, and then blindness is something that's very standard for the type of experiments or the type of studies that we are conducting. Some studies conducted by José Bosso, who shown changes on some neuropsychological evaluations, an improvement that followed the ayahuasca, an ayahuasca session. So what we believe from the results on that very first experiment, on the mental imagery experiment, is that maybe one thing that ayahuasca is doing is to give light to your own memories, whatever memory mean. Because we cannot be restrict on the psychedelic experience. It's very difficult to bring back the concept of memory as we have right now. So it is just as if it's a different cognition. Or is not, ordinary cognition. So it's very difficult to. This is for anything that we do. We are relying on experiments that have been conducted and that results have been found in this. I'd call it a regular state of consciousness. So this is the basis, and this is why I was telling him that. We are using the same basis to study two different things. So maybe we'll have to change the basis. But again, by bringing that to that common, regular consciousness basis, one thing that we are investigating is the relation on, I'm sorry, this is the reason why we are looking for awareness. So if we have an increased awareness, is an increased awareness to what? That is the following question. We have an increased awareness, apparently. At least, some of the brain markers we are seeing tend to move us on this direction. But so what is it that we are increasing our awareness? Maybe to this process of our own memories, whatever memory mean on that different state of consciousness. And so this is what we have so far. One thing that we are investigating is that, as Robin said, the default mode network is a structure that have been related to mind wandering, right? So what is mind wandering? Mind wandering is basically what everyone in this room have done since I started my presentation. That is, you're looking at me, but you're not here. Right? So this is a characteristic of thinking. So maybe what we are seeing in our results is an increased awareness to your own mind wandering with a different content on it. So what you see is you see your mind wandering. Another thing that we are really interested in is the following. I mean, we are humans. And by being humans, if you are in the middle of the trail and you hear something on the right, you're not going to trust your ears. You're going to look at it. So we are visual. We believe in what we see. If you see something, you believe a lot more than if you hear something. So this is one of the reasons why we are so interested in the visual cortex. Because we're not interested in the visual cortex because of the visions. This is not an essential part of the experience, at least to my understanding. So the reason why we are interested in this aspect is to try to understand in a little bit deeper what is the involvement of the visual cortex And this whole novel of awareness, of why do we become more aware to something? So if you see something, you become aware to that right away. So you need that perception to become aware of something. This is something that we are interested in.
Thank you. Thank you so much. That was wonderful. Draulio, Barros, de Araujo.